Hello, everybody, and welcome to VidCon now. This is your regular Tuesday industry session, and I am so psyched today to have Bruce Daisley here from his amazing author here dialing in from the UK to join us. I'm Jim Louderback, but first, a couple of things. I want to let you know that our Discord server, and you can find details about that down below, is going to be open. Well, it's open all the time, but Bruce is going to stop by after this discussion to do a little AMA, so a little bit of tech stuff. So if your questions don't get answered here, come over to Discord and join us over there because the party will just keep on going on Discord. Speaking of questions, if you have a question for us, and I'm happy to do questions at any time during this talk, and Bruce is too, we're going to put them on Twitter. So go up to Twitter and use the hashtag VCNowWorkCulture. Go up on Twitter, ask your question, hashtag VCNowWorkCulture, and I'll check that out. On Discord, we already have a Discord channel made that's called Bruce-Daisley-QA. If you ask questions there, we've got a couple folks that are monitoring that. They'll feed those questions in as well. So hopefully we'll get to as many questions as we can. And then one last thing, we do these industry sessions every Tuesday at 3 p.m. East Coast time in the US. It's noon Pacific, which is where I am. I think it's 8 p.m. in London, available all around the world. Next week, we have Snap CMO Kenny Mitchell talking to us with Kelly Day from Viacom CBS. So great stuff, but I want to jump right into what we're talking about here. So let me really introduce my guest, Bruce Daisley. Bruce, come on in. Hi, how are you? Good to see you.
Hi, how you doing? Hello from the UK. I'm just outside London.
It's good to see you. Do you want me to tell people all about you? Should I talk about your bio or you want to share
something?
Why
don't I do it? So for a long time, I worked in YouTube and Twitter. So I helped set up YouTube in the UK, probably about 12 years ago now. And then I spent 8 years running Twitter across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I guess the critical thing is that during the course of that time, I was really enchanted in culture and work culture. And quite often tech firms tell us that they've got the answers to having the best workplace cultures. I became obsessed with that and I've written a book. It's available pretty much worldwide. And so it's a book about trying to get that magic, about trying to get that sort of effervescent work culture into your workplace. And I know that anyone who works in the creative industry or anyone who works with creators is probably fascinated with how they can create a good working culture, especially in this time that we're in now. So that was my journey, and I ended up writing a book on the back of it.
That's awesome. And so Bruce and I sat down actually at VidCon London in February, towards the end of February, and had a one-on-one chat like this. And I was so taken by it that as we started putting VidCon Now together, I thought, who better to talk to us about work-life balance, eat, sleep, repeat, and where we are now than bringing Bruce back. So Bruce, to start out, what a freaking mess we're in. We thought we loved our jobs, but now we're home and like, what's going on?
It's really interesting. I think probably what it's forced us to do, a lot of people say that, this isn't necessarily a change, more an acceleration, that we invented the internet 15 years ago. All of us have spent our whole times being consumed and entertained by the internet, but we were still using sort of analog devices, offices, to do our jobs. And so it's been a sort of an interesting provocation. No doubt there's a lot of creators, there's a lot of people who have got a balance that they don't always do their work and didn't always do their work in one place. They were working all the time. So, we know that there's always been a degree of evolution into that, but absolutely it's forcing us to really sort of confront some interesting questions. I think the one question that probably we're all faced with is, what are offices for? Because, we went into offices and it's very understandable that we've all got a bit rose-tinted vision over the last 2 or 3 months, maybe 4 months, because we remember that wonderful day that we had in the office, or a day that something hilarious happened. There might have been cupcakes. There might even have been alcohol involved. But, we found ourselves in this sort of glorious explosion of energy in the office. And we thought, okay, actually, I like these people. I'm thrilled with this. And a lot of us have probably over the last 3 months, 4 months, have to confront the question, actually, what is my job? Where do I get the energy from for my job? What are the things about my job I love the most? And, I think all of us are wondering if work will ever be the same again. But maybe there's some upsides to that. We can try and work in a more flexible way.
Well, so how specifically do you think things have really changed since February when we last talked? I mean, what are some of the sort of key trends that I think you see that have changed, that maybe some that might change back when we're on the other side of COVID-19, and maybe some that just are going to stay like this? What are some of those that really pop out to you?
Well, depending on where people are in their careers, and, they might be just starting out right now, and they love the buzz of being around other people. They learn from other people. They watch how the more experienced people in the office are able to negotiate magically and get impossible results out of things. And so it's perfectly human that a lot of us in the last 4 months have said, I miss going to places with people. And that might be restaurants, it might be bars, it might be offices. A lot of us are sitting there thinking, I want to go back to the office. But simultaneously, I think there's almost been universally a sense that people have said, actually, I do find some of these more agreeable. And it might be just your alarm clock goes off an hour later, or it might just be that you don't have a 70, 80-minute commute. And so you have a lot of time freed up. And so that is having an impact. We've seen Spotify listening has gone down. Why? Because people aren't commuting as much. But it's also had an impact that people feel that their own work-life balance has been changed somewhat. And I think that's the interesting challenge for us right now. That there's been a disruption where a lot of the elements of it are kind of positive. There's a lot of parts of it that are probably bad. Most of the stats that you can look at suggest that people are working longer than they've worked before, up to 3 hours longer. The lack of work separation and home life separation is hard. If people are in their 20s, 30s, the chance of them having a home office is pretty unlikely. And so they can find themselves working from the bed, WFB. And obviously that's not the sort of the vision that probably we were sold when we heard about the opportunities of remote work. So obviously these upsides and downsides. I would say the upsides are broadly that a lot of us feel like we can get more done, and we're deleting these parts of our life that seem desperately unproductive. And the downsides are that, to some extent, we're feeling more burnt out than ever before. So I think it's a really interesting intersection. The one thing I would say right now is it's a time of choices. So these opportunities for anyone watching this gets the opportunity to think, how could we reinvent our workplace culture? Most companies sit there and they say to themselves, certainly in the creative industries, they say to themselves, actually, our people, our culture is our secret sauce. That we've got incredible talent we work with, say, or we work working in production, but it's the way that we combine all of those ingredients. It's the sort of the magic ingredient of the culture that makes it special. And I think the best companies right now will be thinking, right, what can we do now in this change, in this transformation? What can we do now to be the authors of a new culture that feels every bit as energizing, even if we're not together 5 days a week in the future?
Yeah, a lot of stuff in there, Bruce, to unpack. A lot of interesting things you brought up. We'll hit on most of them. I want to start off with WFB because it's the first time I've heard it. Work from bed. I remember we all had the dream. It's like, I want to be a mattress tester so that I can test mattresses and work from my bed. I guess it didn't work out that way now. But, you talk a lot about living the zingy life, right? How do you live the zingy life in this WFB, I have no office, oh my God, Zoom world?
Well, I think, look, the reality is that a lot of us maybe are early in our careers. We're just trying to get on. We're trying to get noticed, to make progress. Maybe sort of we loved being in a creative environment, or we loved sort of being surrounded with creative people. And so actually, to some extent, there are some downsides. I think the critical thing of any workplace culture is probably worth understanding. So here's how I found myself looking into this. I was so fortunate to work at YouTube, right early days. YouTubers didn't really exist when I got going there. So, this was right in the early days that probably we went on and we found dogs on skateboards. We found animators. Animation really had like this brand new resurgence when YouTube was first formed. And so I was so lucky to work in that place at that time. And the headquarters were in San Bruno. You would go there and you'd be surrounded with all of this new exploration. And I found myself then latterly trying to understand what it is that is the ingredients of good workplace culture. And the ingredients are often quite simple. I put a lot of it into my book because I sort of felt that I wanted workplace culture to be a bit like something that we could all reach for the recipe for and understand. That's not to say that even if you know the ingredients for it, it's not an incredibly hard dish to make. So the most important thing in workplace culture is something called psychological safety. And that's it's probably one of the most researched parts. It's our ability to speak candidly to each other. So that might be you recognize a time when you couldn't speak honestly to someone. You couldn't give your honest opinions. Why? Because they bit your head off. They shouted you down. They disagreed with you. And what we discover is the better we can get that ability to tell someone honestly, maybe kindly, but honestly how we feel, and it goes both ways, that seems to be in service of us creating the best workplace cultures. Now, actually, that's pretty much true for a lot of things. That might be a client relationship we've got with someone. It might be our partner. It might be our parents. The more candidly we can chat with each other, the better the relations are. I'm not saying it's not difficult to get, but that's the most important thing. And I think right now, a lot of us might find ourselves in a situation where we're working in a zone where maybe we're doing a lot of Zoom calls, we're doing a lot of dialing in Skype calls, and we find ourselves sort of sitting in a room of 20, 30 people online. And as a result of that, we can find that, there's less honesty in the room. What you discover about psychological safety is it doesn't scale. And what do I mean by that? It means that a room of 3 people is far more likely to achieve a state of psychological safety than a room of 30 people. So the psychological safety is really critical. But one of the other components of good workplace culture is what I call sync, sort of being attuned with the people around you, but having sort of this affinity, this bond. And what you discover is that you discover that this is often a lot more animalistic than we might imagine. So we feel a real sense of affinity with people we do stuff with, activities with. And that activity might be singing in a choir. Really wonderful. There's so much wonderful research into choirs. And I guess choirs right now are a thing of the past. We're not finding ourselves with them. But it's no surprise that sports teams around the world and religions around the world appropriate this. What you discover, if you put a group of strangers into a room, you get them to sing maybe some Britney Spears songs together. And you ask them at the end of the experience, do they like the other people in the room? And almost universally, everyone says, these are wonderful people. They've never spoken to them. They've only sort of just about belted out, hit me one more time. And immediately they're pretending they've got an affinity. And what we discover is that whether it's dancing with people, whether it's singing with people, whether it's doing sports with people, when we sort of feel connected to people around us, it builds this cohesion, it builds this bond. Right. Why is that relevant to work? But what it means is that the more time we spend around people doing things, we do forge what one researcher called companion at love. We do forge a bond with these people. And I think right now, where that's been taken from us, where we're not able to form those bonds, we need to think about how can we replace that? How can we build an energy? Thing I'm really taken with is, just looking into the communities that have built, passionate communities that have built online, and what can we learn from them?
So what can we learn from them? What are a couple lessons that you see that will help us? Because as you said, it's great when you can sync together and develop these affinities, but if you can't actually be with people and, sing Britney Spears or, scream and yell at a football match or something like that, how do you do that online? I mean, I go to Reddit, but everybody's yelling at each other there.
Yeah, well, look, it's really interesting. So, one of the things that my feeling was, I wanted to understand how we could develop these communities, these passionate communities, when we're not spending time together. Really interestingly, there's an organization called Automatic, and you won't have heard of them in that form, but they're the people behind WordPress. Well, about a third of all the websites on the web are built on WordPress. So it's like this secret ingredient. It's almost like, they make the things that you consume every day. And they talk about something really interesting. So they made an evolution to working remote all the time. And here's how they went on their evolution. Like a lot of companies in this space, they started off by having an office. And then what they discovered was no one was coming to the office. And so they thought, well, there's no point of paying all this money for offices, so let's get rid of the office. And what they discovered was that they still needed to get people together. So this sync that we forge isn't just going to disappear. It's not going to become invisible. We do need to try and find a way to build it. But here's what they say. They say, if the old relationship we had with work was that we spent 11 months a year together with colleagues and 1 month a year on vacation away from colleagues, the new relationship is that we spend 11 months a year away from colleagues and 1 month a year with colleagues. So they say to people, put your dog sitter on call, put your childminder on standby, make sure that you've got someone to get into your apartment to water your flowers. And we're going to spend 1 week a quarter together. So that's what they say. They recognize that building this sync in person is vital, but they do it on a sort of 1 week a quarter basis. Really interesting, because I guess what they're doing is that they're respecting the research that's been done, but they're trying to do it in a more flexible way. And I think that's, one of the interesting things about this situation we're in right now, that a lot of organizations are going to find their own way to do this, their own way to do this best. It's going to be different for every organization. But what doesn't seem to be negotiable is that if you want to build a really powerful, connected workplace culture, you have to respect the fact that this sync, this sort of connection between people, is a vital component of it.
So I think I have a good idea for a business. Okay, ready? I think we're going to get bubbles that we can all get in, and we're all going to get our work people together every 1 week, every 3 months, and we're all going to roll around in bubbles and bang into each other, but not breathe on each other. What do you think? Is that a good business?
Well, I've definitely seen some of those balls. I think I've seen sort of people playing sport games with them. Absolutely. In fact, yeah, absolutely. So look, there's something in this. I'll give you another example of this. So I'm really taken. We would have been pretty much now getting ready to watch the Olympics. It was going to be in Tokyo around now. Nothing makes me cry more than watching people I've never heard of run races. And someone wins a medal, I start crying. And here's one of the interesting things is that rowing is obviously sort of a massive Olympic sport. Right. And what you discover with rowing is there's some really interesting research about rowing. So the thing we discover about rowing is that the researchers wanted to understand how the relationship between people rowing together had an impact on them doing their job, their job of rowing. Researchers at Oxford University in London, in the UK, they invited a group of rowers. Firstly, they got a group of rowers to row individually on rowing machines together. Then they got a separate group and got them to row in sync with each other, in time with each other on rowing machines. And what they discovered was that the ones who rowed in sync with each other were able to, they had twice the endorphin levels, twice the pleasure hormone levels of the ones who rowed alone. Real strange thing. But, to your point, Jim, if we can get people together, it does seem to have this elevating, enriching effect. And the interesting thing about this is that it's not just the extroverts. Extroverts amongst us have been saying, I can't wait to get back together with people. But it's not just the extroverts, it's also the introverts. A lot of people, when they discover that they get a lot more of their energy from being around other people than they might imagine. So look, I think, a lot of us might be sitting there right now and, we're about to go into difficult economic times where maybe these discussions in any workplace where people are saying, oh, I'm thinking maybe we get rid of the office. And what I'd say is, yes, absolutely. By all means, have that discussion. And there's some really interesting evidence on it. I've spent a lot of time trying to put a lot of this evidence into my newsletter that I curate because it's so fast changing and there's so much new stuff. By all means, try that experiment. It's definitely a time for experiments right now. But what you might discover is 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, people say, it kind of doesn't feel as good. I'm going to go and work somewhere that's got a better culture. And I think all of us can sort of see a few chess moves ahead, and we're starting to say, okay, well, look, if that's a possibility, I can definitely see that people might choose to move to a different organization because it feels different. We can sit there going, okay, so how can we build something more intentional? And what you discover is, I mentioned great time for experiments, but what a lot of people are saying is that there seems to be this real network effect of offices. What do I mean by that? Well, look, the office only works if I come in to make all the commute, I travel all the way in, I get to the office and Jim's there and Fiona's there, and all the people that I know are around. Why? Because I can swing around and chat to them. The thing I was missing while I was sitting in my PJs at home. And however, if I get to the office and Jim's not there because he's working from home today, and I get to the office and Fiona's not there because she's working from her mum's house today, immediately all of the network effects of the office are gone. And this is why some of those organizations like WordPress decided gradually they gave up the office because no one was coming in. So what can we do? Well, we can sort of learn the lessons that if we say some of our DNA, some of our mojo comes from those sort of raucous moments where we're whiteboarding, raucous moments where we're sort of spitballing ideas and some magic happened. If we're saying that that's a really important part of our DNA, it's what makes us better than other organizations doing the same thing, then thinking more intentionally and thinking, I put something on my website that's going up on my newsletter this week, the 12 questions that any organization might ask. And look, you might be starting out, you might be in your first job at your organization, or you might be the boss of the organization. But I think answering 12 questions about what are we doing, what are our decisions, can help you design a workplace culture that will feel special and different, I think.
So, Bruce, you talked a little bit about your newsletter and about the workplace. For those of you that are watching live, over on the right side of the screen is a panel with a couple of things. You got our agenda that shows what's coming up and Twitter and a couple. Over on the right is a little thing where you can click on bios for each of us. And for Bruce's bio, there are a couple logos underneath, one of which will actually lead you to your 12 choices PDF, because I found that last night and put it up there. But let me know, what's the URL of website and URL of your newsletter, and then we're going to go to a question from Twitter.
Yeah, so the website is eatsleepworkrepeat.com, and you'll find the newsletter there. And look, it's just a free curation of a lot of the things going on. So I've been really fascinated with some of the research, and what I found was there's lots of opinion right now about the future of work. And if you turn up to your boss, a meeting with your boss, a Zoom call with your boss, and you give your opinion, I suspect you're going to lose because your boss also has an opinion. So right now, it's a time for research and evidence. And if you can turn up to a conversation with your boss saying, hey, here's an interesting thing, a great piece of work out of MIT that suggests that all the best stuff that happened in the office didn't happen in the emails and meetings, but it happened in the chat between those things. Why? Because the research from MIT said that those were the moments that the boss wasn't present. Wow, that's fascinating. So if you go to the boss and say, we love you, but it's the stuff where you're not there that actually the magic happens. And it's like, it facilitates a great discussion. Almost everyone. Someone said to me today, I was chatting to someone earlier today, and they said, no organization bought an office to have an office. They didn't buy it just to have it. They bought it because they knew that a great workplace culture, a great product would come from having an office. And that's the question facing us now. Similar to that old phrase that, no one bought a drill to own a drill. They bought a drill to put a hole in the wall. They bought a hole in the wall. And, similar to that, no one bought an office for that reason. A lot of us right now are having the discussion. What is the reason why we have an office? And could we get some of those benefits, maybe without spending the money on it? Maybe if you sat there and you said, let's learn something from Automatic, maybe everyone goes every 3 months to a retreat in Palm Springs. Maybe everyone goes for every 3 months, and we cherry pick places around the country, and we choose somewhere to go based on sort of a vote, and we stay in the finest holiday inns that we can find in each city, and we sort of turn it into like a life experience. So I think there's a lot of choices that present ourselves, but the more we can get ahead of those things and make the choices, the better, really.
Hey, Bruce, quick thing you probably didn't know about our producer, Fiona. She worked at the Holiday Inn in Missoula, Montana. So I'm not sure she wants to go back to a Holiday Inn, but it might be somewhere. I actually figured out from listening to you, I think what we want to do at VidCon is I want to send the entire team off to a place where they can all row together, maybe in a pirate ship or something, and then I'll just sit on the beach and watch them. I think that would work perfectly. Let's go to a question from the audience. This is from Miriam Sachs, who I know is here on Twitter, but also is on our Discord server where we're going for an AMA right after this. So head over there once we're done talking. And she asked, how do we create work cultures that are actively inclusive? Many companies will say they are inclusive for legal reasons, but I will feel just like writing in the background, it's not actively implemented. How do we do that? How do we make things that are inclusive? Says Miriam.
Yeah, I think it's about representation. The one of the critical things is that fine words mean nothing if we haven't gone out of our way to make sure that our offices look like the people that in the population. So I think really critical. We had an interesting issue when I worked at Twitter where some of the offices and Latin America in particular, some of the offices didn't look like the people we were representing. And we set about thinking, okay, well, let's make sure that the diversity that we see on the platform, the diversity that we see in these cities is represented in what we're doing. And look, there's multiple angles on it. I think right now, the imperative that everyone understands about diversity and inclusion is the moral one. But there's also, and it's, maybe it undermines the moral point, but there's also a very important economic one. Generally, when people have had the same background and done the same things, you don't get a plurality of opinions. You don't get inputs that understand it. And, you'll know well that devices like the iPhone have suffered from the fact that when HealthKit was first introduced on the iPhone, it didn't have anything about menstruation. Why? Because there were no women working on the development team. And, so these things can be incredibly evident. You might have seen something yesterday about Face ID and the Face ID tools that the police have been using. And irrespective of your opinions on those things, it's clearly of massive significance that they misidentify people of color. Massively important. And yet that's largely because the teams that work on these products are not representative. So, I think the most important thing is that organizations need to set themselves quotas and deliver on them. And I think, certainly, I worked in an organization that was one of the few that did deliver on its diversity quotas. But I think it's a really critical thing that probably we all need to be vocal in defense of right now.
Yeah, good point. Hey, by the way, I may have gotten Miriam's pronoun wrong, and I know. Thanks in advance for correcting me if I did. But that's just another way I think that being inclusive is making sure that we pay attention to those signals, are inclusive to that, and they're harder to see, I think, when we sit behind our Zoom cameras as beyond. I had another question from Daniel Person who wondered, hey, I've been to like 5 different online conferences in the last month. I have more scheduled in the future. Do you think these sort of online conferences are going to be the way of the future? Do we get back to doing face-to-face events? Will they coexist in, what we all call a new normal? I'm not really sure how that works. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, but there's a really interesting thing that I think, if I was a gambling man, I would be shorting events companies for the rest of the next couple of months. But then I would be very, very certain that the value is going to be growing exponentially. Why? Because if we are spending, say collectively, we're going to be spending 3 days a week at home working in various places, or at least these 20, 30, 40% of the population doing that, then the times we are together will be massively valued by us. And I think, obviously in the short term, so the reason why sort of the next few months is going to be hard is because getting together is going to be difficult. But after that, I'm resolute that the value we're going to place on spending time with colleagues, spending time with people with different perspectives to us, spending time with people who have been studying the same problem as us, but have got a different take on it, it's going to be more valuable than ever before. So, I'm resolute that the human race isn't suddenly going to become introverted. In fact, the way that we dissipate our extroversion And all of us have got a bit of both. The way that we dissipate our extroversion is going to be these occasional things rather than these everyday things. Very easy for us to get, I mentioned before, rose-tinted about the office. And we can find ourselves thinking, I love the office, I love the humor, I love the interaction, but transplant back, I suspect I could find footage of all of us in January this year, sitting with the headphones on, barely speaking to anyone all day, just doing meetings. So, we can romanticize it. It can become that wonderful party that, when we were 18, that amazing party, the incredible music. Of course, we can turn it into something it wasn't. I think if we're a bit more intentional, and we might say, look, we're going to be spending one day a week together. And here's what we do. It might be your organization say, look, we're just going to have lunch together one day a week and work from coffee stores nearby, whatever it is. Trying to be more intentional about the way you'll activate some of the sparks, I think can be really helpful. So I think, I would say, here's one of the things I'm fascinated about. The website Glassdoor really has been used a bit, but has never really hit its potential. It's definitely big. Here's a couple of things. On Glassdoor, the number one thing that people say is important to them about choosing a job, biggest thing is workplace culture. Now, if we're spending less time in work, then obviously that has an impact, that the workplace will be less important than the culture of the organization that's created. But the culture is the number one thing. Next thing is that when we look into any sector, broadly, the descriptions of working in different places are about the same. And I think really interesting for us to imagine what that's going to be like in 12 months. Because right now it's like pulling up to Amazon, or it's pulling up to a movie website, and all of the movies have got about the same review. In 12 months, that's going to be very different. There's going to be some people who say this organization is just, I feel like I'm doing my best ever work. I feel like I've got so much autonomy. I feel connected to my colleagues, even though I'm only with them 2 days a week. Other organizations are going to be saying, I'm on 30, 40 hours of Zoom calls a week, sitting on my bed, my back's ruined, like I'm on a highway to misery. And for the first time, there's going to be big differences. It's going to be like going to Yelp, and suddenly there's 1-star reviews, and suddenly there's 5-star reviews. And I think the interesting thing for any of us, no matter whether we're junior, senior, in between, the interesting thing for any of us is going to be, right, how can we play a part in creating a special culture? And look, that's how I got into this, because what I discovered was some of the best workplace cultures aren't shaped by wonderful visionary bosses. In fact, quite often the boss isn't bothered about the culture. They've got other things to do. They've got the CEO, the lead people have got product stuff to do, customers to see. Culture's something that they hand to other people. And so as a result of that, if you're a passionate advocate and you want to shape something special, culture's often there to play for. So, I think really the reason why I've sort of become so dedicated in trying to capture some of this in my newsletter is just because I don't think any of us will work through a disruption this complete again. And so we're going to find ourselves in a situation where actually we're trying now to sort of design what those Glassdoor reviews are going to say in a year's time.
Yeah, really good point. And you talked about the newsletter. It kind of leads us in a little bit to your book. I want to talk about that for a minute. You released it, I think, in 2019 in the UK, and it was a bestseller there. And then literally a week after we finished up with VidCon in London, and right as all this started really getting serious in COVID, you released it here in the US. It's Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, 30 Hacks to Bring Joy to Your Job. Talk a little bit about what you put in the book and what you think still works. And are you working on a revision now that the world has changed, or is it all still completely relevant?
Yeah, I mean, look, you're really important question. So remote work was a big part of it, and sort of understanding. Now, the thing I'll say is that I was pretty even-handed in saying some of the research for remote work isn't great. And what do I mean by that? Well, what you discover is when people work remotely, they generally communicate about 80% less than when they work together. So if you go to remote only and you transfer your company to that, what you discover is that communication goes down. And if you work on the basis that even the best ideas, often it's the communication about them that turns them into something special. You might have a rough idea for something, but it's the little bit of feedback you got there and a little bit of input you got there that turns it into something that stands out. And so if we eliminate 80% of the communication, we eliminate some of those moments where we sandpaper the rough edges off things. So I think, communication going down is obviously a challenge for all of us. And I think we're in a zone now where we should be honest about the upsides and the downsides of everything, just so we can plan around it. Knowing that remote work achieves some disadvantages allows us to say, right, how can we get around that? That's why I'm so fascinated with the WordPress, the Automatic people, because they've planned around it. And so, when I put this book together, like I say, I wanted something like a cookbook. I have an immensely short attention span. I buy more books than I finish. The pile of books next to my bed is phenomenal, considering I never read ever in bed. Why I pile them there, I have no idea. But I never read in bed, and I've just piled these books in there. So I wanted something that was going to be rather more easy. I was sort of imagining, like cookbooks. You might buy a cookbook. You see that Chrissy Teigen's done something. You buy her cookbook. You cook one thing out of it. You see that as a success. I thought, okay, I want a book that's like that. I want to give you the science of how you can improve your own burnout, the science of how you can improve your own team dynamic. And if you try one thing, there's a chance you might try another one. So it's like a cookbook of things, probably the balance of them now, I would say that, the chapters about remote work are more important. The chapters about team sync are as important as ever. The chapters about personal burnout and beating that are probably, eternal and perennial. So, the fascination for me was bringing evidence to the debate. I read a wonderful book a few years ago called Rework by two of the guys who run a company called Basecamp. And it was full of these sort of explosive, angry opinions. It was sort of like a box of fireworks. You need to do this. You need to abolish this. And I thought, that's wonderful if you're the CEO of a company, because you can do all these things. Most of us aren't the CEO of anything. I'm never going to be the CEO of anything. I need to make something happen. I need someone else to agree with it. And so as a result of that, it sort of changes your perspective. So I knew you got to turn up to the gunfight. You got to turn up with some school books. And so, my view was most bosses are not sort of these tyrannical, evil figures with angry opinions. They're sort of reasonable people, but they need proof. So I thought, if I can turn up with proof about how we could change our meetings, or proof about how we could improve burnout, or proof about why we needed to stop emailing all weekend, maybe if I could give some evidence on the downside of those things, it would help us change the culture. So, probably the order of the book would be different, but the content would be the same.
Great. Awesome. And you can get that book on Amazon. You can get it all over where good books are sold. We have another question from Twitter. This is from the Random Fandom Media Group. I just like saying that. Wants to know, what about negative consequences that might result from all of this? What about privacy, for example? Are there privacy issues? I mean, we're being tracked everywhere. Are there some negative consequences that you see around all this home work life?
Unequivocally. So look, what's the lesson of the internet so far? The lesson of the internet so far is that we enter into things optimistically, and then we turn out to see the consequences after, which is a wonderful tribute to human character. The idea that we would see the good first, and then sort of suddenly realize, oh yeah, why did no one realize that? But what are the things that might go wrong? Well, right now, empathy. Almost every time that we've experienced communication through screens, we sometimes get more obsessed with ourselves and our opinion and the role that we're playing in that communication than the person at the other end. So if you've got an office that never meets each other, and maybe a lot of us might go into organizations where we sort of at months at a time we don't meet each other. People could start new jobs where a laptop is mailed to them in the post, or not even. Access codes are emailed to them. So we might find that we're in a situation where the way that we work together is changing. And what you might find as a consequence of that is that there's an empathy gap forms. And we've seen in some organizations that generational splits and identity politics has played a part in how people perceive each other. It's very possible that the affinity that we could feel with work colleagues will be lost to a sort of sense that we like some of our colleagues and not others, or one stat I saw was that 42% of US workers don't have a single friend at work. In the old days, you can very easily imagine where that isolation gets worse. And, one thing that work was relatively good at was that most of us were able to find some sort of sense of belonging, some sense of affinity, some sense of escape from, whether it's our home life or our responsibilities elsewhere. And if those things go down, most definitely it could be hard. Broadly, I tend to err. I tend to start like those optimists and err on the side of caution and pessimism. What I do think is there's going to be these twin tracks. There will be some organizations that get this, that think, okay, our objective has to be less than 6 hours of Zoom calls a week. For some people, that number must seem ridiculous because they're on 20 at the moment. But what you discover is that, the more time people spend on video calls, there's sort of like a strange S-curve on it, that initially the video calls we spend time on are energizing and positive, but we reach a point where the return starts flattening and diminishing. And, we just have to make sure that we don't spend too much time on those things. So I think, a lot of us are going to be sitting there thinking, how can we interpret the facts that are coming to us? And the best organizations, as I say, are the ones where people will feel inspired by, maybe they love their Tuesdays and Wednesdays with colleagues and they power through work on Monday, Thursday, Friday. But, we're going to find different rhythms. And the great thing is, I think, our friends are going to tell us. But I'm not optimistic that the experience for everyone will be universally good, which is why right now, a bit of humility, organizations trying to work out what's best, I think is the most important thing.
Well, I will say, after all the zillions of Zoom calls I've been on over the last 4 months or 5 months, this is definitely an energizing and positive Zoom call. And so they don't all have to just ease into like uniformly bad. So keep looking for those good things. One more question from Twitter. Social media Swiss Army Knife, that's a nice handle, says, how do you think work from home life will exist in the future now that we've proven we can do our jobs from anywhere? I mean, your old company, Twitter, basically said you don't need to come to the office anymore. You can just work from home. How do you think when we get on the other side of this COVID thing, that work from home thing happens, exists, looks like? What changes?
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's a big, there's a wonderful thing. I put it in the newsletter about 3 or 4 weeks ago. There's a French architect, city designer, who talked about this really interesting notion where cities go through this evolution. They started off, so in the sort of medieval times, they started off, like he describes cities like eggs. Cedric Price, his name is. Cities started off like raw eggs. They had this hard calcified shell that was the city wall, and then inside it was protected. Then we went into something closer to a fried egg, and what that is, it's like a concentrated yolk, and then this sort of spread out white suburban. And so we found that there was a business district, then like a spread out residential area. And Cedric Price said the final stage of evolution will be a scrambled egg. And, the mayor of Paris got re-elected today. So a bit of international news for you yesterday. And she talks about the 15-minute city, the idea that everything you want should be 15 minutes away from you. Now, look, that's not preventing you from delving elsewhere. But if we don't work from home, then we might work from near home. And the idea that we maybe change our relationship with this city, and we don't spend, this thing where we spend 40, 50 minutes a day, maybe significantly more, in traffic and commuting, might be a thing of the past, but we still feel as productive. One of the challenges a lot of people have got right now is they say, look, I'm finding it exhausting that because I'm working from the place that I'm sleeping, I just tend to default to work all the time. So, that idea of work near home might be one solution to that.
Well, I have to say, because I want to follow on what the mayor of Paris says, is I need a good cheese shop and I need good croissants 15 minutes from me. So if we could make that happen, I would go a little bit further from my job. We are basically almost running out of time, but I want to give one last thought from you is, you've written books, you have a podcast that's great, you've got the newsletter, you've got your website. What's next for you? What are you going to do now?
Yeah, I mean, look, firstly, I'm really energized by the discussions about workplace culture and changing work that are happening right now. It's sort of, it's a singular time. And I think I got so much of my energy from working in really exciting, positive places that I want to make sure that, I sort of pay that forward. So I'm really interested in that. I'm sort of, I'm sort of fascinated with having a part of that discussion, really, and playing a part of that. So, look, who knows how it's going to evolve, but I think I'm just loving the dialogue that I'm getting into on those things.
Cool. Well, it's so great to have you here. Always energized by talking with you. I encourage you to check out the links, buy the book, check the newsletter out, sign up for the newsletter, read, listen, work, repeat, build a great culture. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jim. And I'll see you over on the Discord now.
Yeah, so we're on our way over to the Discord server. The channel is Bruce-Daisley-QA in the industry area of Discord. We're going to do a little AMA, text-based AMA. So come join us there. A couple things to think about. Next week, same time, which is 3 p.m. East Coast US time, noon Pacific. Figure out where you are on the world map. We will have Kenny Mitchell, who's the CMO of Snap, which is going to be awesome. So join us for that. And I think that's all I have to say. So I will see all of you over in the Discord, and join us for more VidCon now as the next few weeks and months go by. See you later.